The crystal towers of Zephyr Prime burned against the purple sky. Ambassador Cathara pressed his scaled hands against the command center window and watched his people die. The Void Swarm had arrived 3 days ago. Now half his world was gone. "Sir, the children's sanctuary in Sector 7 has fallen," reported his aide. The young Zephyrian's voice shook with fear. "They took everyone, even the babies." Cathara closed his eyes. The swarm didn't just kill. They harvested. Every living being became food for their endless hunger. His people had fought bravely, but their weapons were made for peace, not war. The crystalline cities that had stood for thousands of years crumbled like glass under the alien assault. "How many evacuation ships made it out?" he asked. 12, sir. Out of 300. The numbers hit him like physical blows. Millions of his people were already dead. Millions more would die in the coming hours. The Void Swarm moved like a plague across worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty shells of rock and metal. "Send the message," Cathara whispered. His aide hesitated. "Sir, are you certain? After what happened during the Titan War, most species won't even acknowledge Earth exists. They call humans monsters." "I've seen monsters," Cathara said, watching another crystal spire collapse in the distance. "These creatures that devour our children, that consume entire worlds without thought or mercy, these are monsters. Whatever the humans are, they can't be worse than extinction." Far across the galaxy, Jake Morrison sat in the quiet darkness of Luna Base Communications Center. The night shift was usually boring. Earth's colonies sent routine reports. Asteroid miners complained about equipment failures. Nothing interesting ever happened on the third shift. Then his console lit up with an emergency signal. Jake almost ignored it. Pirates sometimes used fake distress calls to lure rescue ships into traps. But something about this transmission made him pause. The signal was coming from beyond the outer colonies, from a part of space where no human had ever traveled. He put on his headset and listened. What he heard made his blood run cold. "This is Ambassador Cathara of the Zephyrian Confederation. We are under attack by an alien force known as the Void Swarm. They are consuming our worlds, harvesting our people. Our children are being taken, our cities are falling, we have tried everything. Our weapons do nothing, our shields cannot stop them." The voice paused. Jake could hear explosions in the background, screams, the sound of buildings falling. "We send this message to all civilized species in the galaxy. We need help. We are dying. Please, if anyone can hear this, if anyone has the power to stop these creatures, we beg you, save our children, save what remains of our people. We will give anything, do anything, just please help us." The message ended. Jake sat in silence for a long moment, then replayed it. The desperation in the alien voice was real. This wasn't a trick or a joke. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was being destroyed. He forwarded the message to Earth Defense Command and went back to his routine duties. But he couldn't stop thinking about the fear in that alien voice. Admiral Lisa Carter received the message 2 hours later in her office deep inside the Pentagon. She had heard many distress calls during her 30 years of service. This one was different. The aliens weren't asking for supplies or medical aid. They were begging for salvation. She read the intelligence reports about the Zephyrian Confederation, 7 peaceful star systems, no military worth mentioning. They made beautiful art and studied the stars. They had never hurt anyone. Then she read about the Void Swarm. The few surviving reports painted a picture of nightmare creatures that traveled between worlds in living ships. They didn't negotiate or communicate. They simply consumed everything in their path. Carter walked to her window and looked out at the lights of Washington. 20 years had passed since the Titan Rebellion, when Earth's colonies had tried to break away from home rule. The war that followed had been brutal. Humanity had done things that shocked even their own allies. When it ended, most of the galaxy wanted nothing to do with Earth. Now someone was desperate enough to call for human help anyway. She picked up her secure phone and called the president. The conversation lasted 30 minutes. When it ended, Carter had permission to deploy a rescue fleet. Captain Ryan Blake was eating breakfast with his crew when the orders came through. The message was simple, but the implications were huge. Humanity was going back to war. "So we're really doing this?" asked Pete Sullivan, his demolitions expert. "We're going to help some aliens we've never heard of fight some other aliens we've never heard of?" "That's what the orders say," Blake replied. He looked around the table at his senior staff. These were good people who had followed him through the worst fighting of the Titan War. They knew what real combat looked like. "What do we know about these void swarm creatures?" asked Carmen Rodriguez, his chief medical officer. "Not much," Blake admitted. "The reports say they're some kind of hive mind species. They travel in bioships and consume everything they encounter. No one has ever successfully fought them off." Danny Wright, his tactical officer, looked up from his data pad. "Sir, I've been reading the Zephyrian transmissions. These creatures don't just kill. They harvest living beings for food. They're taking children, sir." The table went quiet. Blake had seen many horrible things during the war, but the thought of alien creatures feeding on children made his stomach turn. "How soon can we deploy?" he asked. "The Vengeance is fully stocked and ready," Wright replied. "Admiral Carter has assigned us 3 escort ships and a support vessel. We can leave within 6 hours." Blake nodded. "Then that's what we'll do. These Zephyrians asked for help. They're going to get it." As his crew prepared for departure, Blake stood alone on the ship's bridge and stared out at the stars. He had spent 20 years trying to forget the things he had done during the Titan War. The civilians caught in crossfire, the prisoners who had died during interrogation, the colonies that had been bombed into submission. The galaxy called humans monsters for good reason. But maybe this time, being monsters would be exactly what the situation required. Back on Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Cathara watched the last evacuation ship disappear into hyperspace. The swarm had taken 3/4 of his world. His beautiful capital city was nothing but rubble and feeding pits. The crystalline towers that had reached toward the stars for millennia lay shattered, like broken glass. His aide approached with a communication device. "Sir, we've received a response to our distress call." Cathara's hearts began to beat faster. "From whom?" "The Earth Defense Force, sir. They're sending ships." For the first time in days, Cathara felt hope. He had heard stories about the humans during the Titan War. They were said to be incredibly violent, capable of terrible things. But right now, terrible was exactly what his people needed. "How long until they arrive?" he asked. 3 days, sir." Cathara looked out at his dying world. 3 days. Could they hold out that long? Could enough of his people survive to make rescue worthwhile? In the distance, a swarm bioship rose into the sky, its belly swollen with harvested Zephyrians. Cathara watched it disappear into space and made a silent prayer to his ancestors. He had called for salvation. Soon he would learn what form that salvation would take. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian territory. Captain Ryan Blake stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and stared at the view screen in shock. He had seen war before, but nothing like this. 3 entire planets were gone. Not destroyed, but stripped down to bare rock. Where once there had been blue oceans and green continents, now only gray spheres of stone remained. Floating debris fields marked where space stations and orbital cities had once existed. "My God," whispered Danny Wright from his tactical station. "They consumed everything." "Sir, I'm picking up massive biosignatures throughout the system," reported the sensor officer. "Hundreds of them, maybe thousands." Blake watched the screen as the computer identified the contacts. The void swarm ships didn't look like any vessel he had ever seen. They were organic, like giant insects or sea creatures. Some were as small as fighters. Others were larger than Earth's biggest battleships. All of them pulsed with sickly green light. "Communications. Try to raise any surviving Zephyrian forces," Blake ordered. After several minutes, a weak signal came through. The voice was barely audible through the static. "Human ships. This is Ambassador Cathara. We are hiding in the asteroid belt of our outer system. Most of our people are gone." "Ambassador, this is Captain Blake of the Earth Defense Force. We're here to help. Can you give us information about these swarm creatures?" "They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They only consume. We have tried everything. Our weapons cannot penetrate their bioarmor. They adapt to our defenses within hours. Blake studied the tactical display. The swarm had spread throughout the system like an infection. They were mining the dead planets, harvesting every atom of useful material. But they weren't expecting resistance. "Sir," Danny Wright called out, "I'm detecting a swarm harvesting operation near the fourth planet. They have captured Zephyrian civilians. Looks like several thousand." Blake felt his jaw tighten. The reports had been true. These creatures were taking prisoners, probably for food. He had to act fast. "All ships, battle stations. We're going in." The human fleet accelerated toward the fourth planet. As they approached, the full horror of the swarm operation became clear. Dozens of bioships surrounded a massive processing vessel. Long tentacles reached down from the main ship and dragged screaming Zephyrians up into its belly. "Sir, they're loading civilians into that thing alive," reported the sensor officer. "I'm reading over 2,000 life signs." Blake had seen enough. "Launch fighters. Target their escort vessels. But be careful not to hit that processing ship. We need those people alive." The battle began badly for the humans. Swarm fighters swarmed around the human ships like angry wasps. Their bioweapons ate through armor plating. Their ships moved in ways that defied physics, bending and twisting like living creatures. But then something changed. Blake watched as one of his fighter pilots, Lieutenant Bobby Clark, tried a different approach. Instead of fighting the swarm ships directly, he began ramming them at high speed. The organic vessels, designed to flex and absorb energy weapons, crumpled under the brutal impact. "All fighters, new tactics," Blake ordered. "These things are built to handle energy. Use kinetics. Ram them. Tear them apart." The tide began to turn. Human ships started using their superior speed and armor to literally crash into swarm vessels. The organic ships, evolved to fight civilized opponents with energy weapons, had no defense against raw brutality. But Blake noticed something else. When swarm fighters were destroyed, they didn't just explode. They screamed. The bioships were alive and they felt pain. "Right, are you recording those sounds?" he asked. "Yes, sir. The swarm ships are transmitting distress signals when they're hit. Can we amplify those signals?" "I don't understand, sir." Blake smiled grimly. "These creatures share a hive mind, right? They're all connected. So when one feels pain, they all feel it. Amplify those death screams and broadcast them back at their fleet." Wright looked shocked. "Sir, that would be psychological warfare against a sentient species." "They're eating children, Wright. Do it." The tactical officer's hands shook as he programmed the communications array. Soon the agonized screams of dying swarm creatures echoed across the entire system. The effect was immediate. Swarm ships began to retreat, their movements erratic and confused. Blake pressed his advantage. "Colonel Stone, prepare your boarding teams. We're taking that processing ship." Colonel Amy Stone had served with Blake during the Titan War. She knew what he expected from her soldiers. Her enhanced Marines were the product of Earth's most classified military programs, stronger and faster than normal humans, with neural implants that let them process combat data instantly. "Sir, that ship is crawling with swarm creatures," Stone reported. "My scans show thousands of them." "Then you better bring enough ammunition." Stone's Marines launched from the Vengeance in armored drop pods. They crashed through the bioships, hull like bullets through flesh. What happened next would have shocked most civilized species. The Marines didn't just fight the swarm creatures. They studied them. Every shot was carefully placed to wound, rather than kill. Stone's soldiers dragged injured swarm drones to improvised examination areas and began cutting them open while they were still alive. "Fascinating," reported Dr. Kevin Miller over the comm system. "These creatures have a distributed nervous system. Pain signals travel through their entire body network. If we can isolate those pathways." Blake watched through the helmet cameras as his people worked. They moved through the bioship like surgeons, systematically dismantling the swarm's defenses while learning everything they could about alien biology. The rescued Zephyrians huddled in the processing chambers, too traumatized to speak, but Ambassador Cathara, who had insisted on joining the rescue mission despite the danger, watched the humans work with growing unease. "Captain Blake," he said over the comm, "your soldiers are torturing those creatures." "My soldiers are gathering intelligence," Blake replied coldly. These things were about to eat your people alive. I want to know everything about them so we can stop them." Within hours, Dr. Miller had mapped the swarm's biological systems. He discovered that the creatures shared not just thoughts through their hive mind, but sensations. Every drone felt what every other drone experienced. "Captain, I have an idea," Miller reported. "If we can introduce a biological agent into their system, something that causes severe pain, it will spread through their entire network. They'll be too busy suffering to fight effectively." Blake approved the research immediately. Soon Miller was synthesizing compounds that attacked swarm nervous systems. The first test subjects were captured drones from the processing ship. Their screams echoed through the biovessel as the experimental toxins ate away at their pain receptors. "It's working," Miller reported excitedly. "The compound is spreading through their bionetwork. Every swarm creature in a 50-kilometer radius is experiencing agony." Blake smiled. For the first time since arriving in Zephyrian space, he felt optimistic. The swarm might be advanced, but they had never fought an enemy willing to turn their own biology against them. As the human fleet prepared for the next phase of their campaign, Ambassador Cathara found himself alone in his temporary quarters aboard the Vengeance. He had gotten what he asked for. The humans were winning. His people were being saved. So why did he feel so afraid? Through his porthole, he could see swarm bioships fleeing in all directions. But he could also see human ships pursuing them, not to drive them away, but to capture more specimens. The humans weren't just fighting the swarm, they were learning to become something worse. Cathara tried to push the thought away. His people were alive because of human intervention. Whatever methods they used, the results spoke for themselves. But deep in his heart, he began to wonder if they had traded one nightmare for another. Word of humanity's methods spread through the surviving Zephyrian ships like wildfire. Emergency broadcasts carried shaky footage of human soldiers at work. The images were hard to watch. Captain Tony Mitchell stood in the communications bay of his ship, the Retribution, reviewing the latest intelligence reports. His job was psychological warfare, and the Void Swarm was giving him plenty of material to work with. "Sir, we've successfully planted recording devices on 12 captured swarm bioships," reported his aide, Lieutenant Helen Torres. "The footage we're getting is incredible." Mitchell nodded. The plan was simple but effective. Human boarding teams would capture swarm vessels, then turn them into what he called broadcast stations. Every moment of pain, every scream, every desperate attempt to escape was recorded and transmitted back to the swarm collective. "Show me the latest feed," Mitchell ordered. The screen displayed the interior of a captured bioship. Dr. Kevin Miller and his research team had set up a makeshift laboratory inside the creature's stomach cavity. Dozens of swarm drones hung from the walls, kept alive by medical equipment while Miller's people studied their nervous systems. "We've discovered something fascinating," Miller's voice came through the speakers. "These creatures can't block pain signals the way humans can. Every sensation travels through their entire network. Watch this." Miller touched a small device to one of the captured drones. The creature convulsed in agony, but more importantly, every other swarm organism within 100 kilometers suddenly stopped what it was doing and began writhing in shared pain. Mitchell smiled. "Excellent. How long can you keep them conscious?" "Indefinitely, sir. Their biology is designed for rapid healing. We can inflict damage faster than they can repair it, creating a constant cycle of suffering." The footage cut to another captured vessel where Sergeant Kelly Davis was conducting her own experiments. Davis had been an interrogation specialist during the Titan War. Her methods had been considered extreme even by Earth standards. "The key is breaking their collective identity," Davis explained to the camera. "These drones think of themselves as part of a greater whole. But if you isolate them, force them to experience individual terror, their mental network starts to fracture." She gestured to a row of captured swarm creatures. Each one was suspended in a separate chamber, cut off from the hive mind by jamming devices. Without their collective consciousness, the creatures had become something else. They cowered, whimpered, begged for mercy in their alien language. "Once they're broken individually, we reintroduce them to the network," Davis continued. They carry their trauma back to the collective. Fear spreads like a virus through their entire species. Ambassador Kithara watched these broadcasts from his quarters aboard the Vengeance. Each new report made him feel sicker. The humans were not just defeating the swarm, they were torturing them systematically, scientifically. "Ambassador," came a voice from his doorcom. "Captain Blake requests your presence on the bridge." Kithara found Blake studying a tactical display of the Zephyrian system. The swarm's advance had stopped completely. Their bioships floated motionless in space, apparently paralyzed by the constant stream of pain signals flooding their network. "Your people are safe now, Ambassador," Blake said without looking up. "The swarm can't function while experiencing this level of trauma." "What you're doing to them is monstrous," Kithara said quietly. Blake finally turned to face him. "What they were doing to your children was monstrous. This is just effective. There has to be another way. Some form of communication, negotiation." "We tried communication," Blake interrupted. "Remember? They ignored your surrender offers and kept eating your people. Sometimes monsters only understand one language." Kithara wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The humans were right about one thing. The swarm had shown no mercy, no capacity for reason. They had consumed entire worlds without hesitation. But watching the endless torture broadcasts made him wonder if his people had simply traded one nightmare for a worse one. Dr. Steve Roberts had set up his laboratory on a captured swarm mothership. The vessel was the size of a small city, its organic corridors pulsing with sickly light. Roberts loved the irony of using the creature's own body as a research facility. "The beauty of biological warfare," he explained to his research team, "is that it turns their strengths into weaknesses. Their shared nervous system, their rapid adaptation, their collective consciousness, all of it can be weaponized." Roberts had been working on a new project. Instead of simply causing pain, he was developing agents that rewrote swarm biology from the inside. His latest creation was a virus that convinced swarm drones that their own queens were enemies. "Watch this," he said, injecting the virus into a test subject. Within minutes, the drone began attacking other swarm creatures in its holding cell. The violence was savage, mindless. "The virus spreads through their bio network," Roberts continued. "Soon entire fleets will be turning on each other. They'll destroy themselves while we watch." His assistant, a young scientist named Dr. Nancy White, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, isn't this genocide? We're not just defeating them, we're eliminating their entire species." Roberts shrugged. "They were trying to eliminate every other species in the galaxy. This is just natural selection at work. We're the better predator." The results of Roberts's work became visible within days. Swarm fleets that had been terrorizing the galaxy for centuries suddenly turned on themselves. Bioships that had fought side by side for millennia began tearing each other apart. Major Samantha Bell established what she called processing centers on captured swarm worlds. These facilities served multiple purposes. They were research labs, psychological warfare stations, and what she privately thought of as factories of fear. "The goal isn't just to defeat them," Bell explained to her staff. "It's to make them afraid of us. Every swarm creature in the galaxy needs to know that humans are something to be feared above all else." Bell's centers were designed for maximum psychological impact. Captured swarm creatures were subjected to procedures that pushed the limits of their ability to survive. But they were kept alive, conscious and connected to the hive mind so that their experiences would spread throughout the collective. "Pain is temporary," Bell told her subordinates. "Fear is permanent. We want the swarm to remember this long after the war is over." The centers operated around the clock. Teams of human scientists, soldiers, and technicians worked in shifts to maintain a constant stream of trauma flowing through the swarm network. They developed new methods daily, each one more effective than the last. Lieutenant Bobby Clark had taken to flying his fighter directly through swarm formations, broadcasting recordings of tortured drones at maximum volume. The effect was immediate. Swarm ships would break formation and flee in panic, often colliding with each other in their desperation to escape. "It's like they've developed a phobia of us," Clark reported to his squadron. "They can't even think clearly when they hear our ships approaching." But the most disturbing development came from Colonel Amy Stone's enhanced Marines. They had begun to change, adapting to their environment in ways that disturbed even their creators. Stone herself had started exhibiting behaviors that worried her medical officers. She collected swarm specimens not for research, but as trophies. She spoke about the aliens with a mixture of contempt and fascination that bordered on obsession. "They're actually quite beautiful when you understand their biology," she told Dr. Miller during one of her medical evaluations. "Every part of their body serves a purpose. Even their capacity for suffering is perfectly designed." Miller made notes about Stone's condition, but didn't report his concerns to Captain Blake. The colonel's methods were effective, and that was all that mattered in wartime. As the human campaign continued, Ambassador Cathara found himself sending secret messages to other civilizations throughout the galaxy. His official reports praised the humans as saviors. His private communications told a different story. The humans had saved his people, but at a terrible cost. They had unleashed something upon the galaxy that might be worse than the original threat. Cathara began to wonder if survival was worth the price they had all paid. The Void Swarm was dying. Not just defeated, but systematically eliminated from existence. For the first time in their million-year history, the creatures that had devoured countless worlds were running in terror. Captain Ryan Blake stood in the command center of the Vengeance and watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Red dots representing swarm ships blinked out one by one across the galaxy. His fleet's psychological warfare programs had spread far beyond the Zephyrian system, carried by fleeing swarm vessels to every corner of their territory. "Sir, we're receiving surrender transmissions from swarm queens in 17 different systems," reported Danny Wright. "They're offering to withdraw from all inhabited worlds." Blake laughed coldly. "Surrender? After what they did to the Zephyrians? I don't think so. Continue the hunt." The human fleet had grown during the campaign. More ships arrived daily from Earth, along with specialized equipment and personnel. Admiral Lisa Carter had declared the swarm elimination a top priority for the Defense Force. No expense was spared. Captain Tony Mitchell supervised the expansion of his psychological warfare network. Human ships now broadcast swarm death screams across entire star systems. The sounds drove any surviving creatures insane with terror. Many swarm ships simply shut down completely, their crews unable to function. "We've achieved something unprecedented," Mitchell reported to Blake during their weekly briefing. "An entire species has developed clinical trauma from the mere thought of encountering us. They can't even say the word human in their language without experiencing panic attacks." Dr. Kevin Miller had established permanent research facilities on dozens of captured swarm worlds. His team studied every aspect of the aliens' biology, psychology, and technology. But Miller wasn't interested in understanding the swarm anymore. He wanted to perfect the art of destroying them. "We've identified the exact neural pathways that control their fear responses," Miller explained to his staff. "By targeting these areas with specific frequencies, we can induce terror so intense that their hearts simply stop beating." His laboratories looked like scenes from a nightmare. Thousands of swarm creatures hung in suspension tanks, kept alive by machines, while Miller's team conducted endless experiments. The aliens had become nothing more than test subjects for humanity's growing expertise in biological warfare. Major Samantha Bell's processing centers had evolved into something beyond military necessity. What had started as interrogation facilities were now monuments to human cruelty. Bell took personal pride in developing new methods of extracting information and fear from swarm prisoners. "The key is understanding their psychology," Bell explained to visiting officers from Earth. "These creatures were apex predators for millions of years. They never experienced helplessness before we arrived. Teaching them to feel powerless breaks something fundamental in their minds." Bell's centers operated with scientific precision. Teams of specialists worked around the clock to maintain optimal levels of suffering in their subjects. They had learned to keep swarm creatures conscious and aware for weeks at a time, mining their terror for psychological warfare purposes. But the humans were changing too. Prolonged exposure to their own methods was affecting the soldiers and scientists involved in the campaign. Colonel Amy Stone had begun collecting pieces of swarm creatures as decorations for her quarters. She wore jewelry made from alien chitin and spoke to her trophies as if they were pets. "They understand pain in ways humans never could," Stone told Dr. Miller during one of her increasingly disturbing interviews. "Every nerve ending is connected to their consciousness. They feel everything we do to them with perfect clarity." Miller noted that Stone seemed to find this fact comforting rather than horrifying. Her psychological profile indicated severe changes in her empathy responses, but her methods remained effective, so her condition was deemed acceptable by command. Lieutenant Bobby Clark had stopped sleeping. He spent his off-duty hours reviewing footage from the processing centers, studying the faces of dying swarm creatures. His squadron mates avoided him now. His laughter during combat missions had taken on a quality that disturbed even hardened veterans. "I can predict exactly how they'll scream," Clark told his wingman during a patrol mission. "Different types of swarm creatures have different pain responses. The drones whimper, the warriors roar, but the queens sound almost human when they beg." Dr. Steve Roberts had perfected his biological weapons beyond anything imagined. His latest creation was a virus that didn't kill swarm creatures, but made them hyper-aware of their own mortality. Infected aliens became paralyzed by existential terror, unable to function as they contemplated their inevitable deaths. "It's beautiful in its simplicity," Roberts explained to his research team. "We've given them the gift of human-level self-awareness, but without the psychological tools to cope with it. They experience consciousness the way we do, but with none of our defense mechanisms." The virus spread through swarm territory like wildfire. Entire fleets of bioships drifted helplessly in space, their crews catatonic with philosophical dread. Some swarm creatures began destroying themselves rather than live with the weight of conscious thought. Ambassador Cathara watched the systematic extinction of the swarm with growing horror. The aliens that had threatened to devour his people were now nothing more than experimental subjects for human science. But what disturbed him most was how efficiently the humans worked. "Captain Blake," Cathara said during one of their regular meetings, "the swarm is finished. They pose no threat to anyone anymore. Perhaps it's time to consider mercy." Blake looked at him with genuine confusion. "Mercy? For creatures that were eating children a few months ago? I think you've forgotten what they were doing to your people." "I haven't forgotten," Cathara replied quietly. "But what you're doing to them now is worse than anything they ever did to us." "How is it worse?" "Because you know it's wrong and you're doing it anyway." Blake was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Ambassador, the difference between us and them is that we're smart enough to win. Everything else is just philosophy." The final phase of the campaign began when human forces located the swarm's homeworld. The planet was ancient, covered in massive biostructures that had grown over millions of years. It housed the species' collective memory, their cultural history, their entire identity as a civilization. Admiral Carter arrived personally to oversee the destruction. She wanted to watch as humanity erased the swarm from history completely. No trace of their species would remain. "This is what happens to monsters," Carter announced to her fleet as they prepared to sterilize the homeworld. "They get replaced by better monsters." The bombardment lasted for days. Human ships used weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering to biological targets. The planet's living structures screamed as they died, their agony broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to any species that might consider threatening humanity. Dr. Nancy White, who had started the campaign as Dr. Roberts' assistant, now commanded her own research division. She had spent months studying Zephyrian biology under the guise of helping their recovery efforts. Her real purpose was more sinister. "We need to understand our allies as thoroughly as we understood our enemies," White explained to her team. "The Zephyrians trust us completely. They've given us access to their entire civilization. We should take advantage of that trust." White's research focused on Zephyrian neural pathways, social structures, and biological vulnerabilities. Her official reports praised their peaceful nature and artistic achievements. Her classified studies detailed exactly how to control, or Eliminate them if necessary. As the swarm homeworld burned, Ambassador Kithara sent one final message to the surviving governments of the galaxy. The transmission was encrypted and routed through multiple relays to hide its origin. "We asked for salvation from monsters," the message began. "What we received was salvation by greater monsters. The swarm is gone, but what has replaced them may be worse. Humanity has returned to the galaxy, and they are no longer the species we remember from 20 years ago. They have become something new, something terrible. Prepare yourselves." The message ended with coordinates showing human fleet positions throughout former swarm territory. Kithara hoped someone would understand the warning in time. The void swarm was extinct. Every last creature had been hunted down and eliminated from the galaxy. What had once been the most feared species in known space was now nothing but data in human research files and specimens in laboratory freezers. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship as it entered Zephyrian space for the victory celebration. The crystal cities had been rebuilt, more beautiful than before. Grateful crowds filled the streets waving banners that praised humanity as their saviors. But Carter wasn't looking at the celebrations. She was studying the tactical displays that showed human base positions throughout former swarm territory. Dozens of military installations now controlled the galaxy's most important hyperspace routes and resource deposits. "Admiral," reported her aide, "the Zephyrian government has agreed to all our security proposals. They're granting us permanent basing rights throughout their territory." Carter nodded. The bases were officially for protection against future threats. In reality, they gave Earth control over 7 star systems and their vast mineral wealth. The grateful Zephyrians had signed the agreements without reading them carefully. Captain Ryan Blake walked through the crowds on Zephyr Prime, accepting the praise of alien civilians who called him a hero. Children touched his uniform with reverence. Adults bowed as he passed. They had no idea what he had done to save them. Blake had received orders from Earth Defense Command that morning. He was being promoted and transferred to a new assignment. His mission was to establish security partnerships with other species throughout the galaxy. The same species that had refused to help the Zephyrians in their time of need. "Captain Blake," Ambassador Kithara approached him during the ceremony. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my people." Blake shook the alien's hand and smiled. "Just doing our job, Ambassador." Kithara's expression was troubled. "I've been thinking about something you said during the campaign, about monsters only understanding one language. Do you really believe that?" "I believe in results," Blake replied. "Your people are alive. The threat is gone. Everything else is just philosophy. And if someday the galaxy decides that humanity is the threat?" Blake's smile didn't change, but his eyes grew cold. "Then they'll discover why the swarm failed." Colonel Frank Morris oversaw the construction of humanity's largest military base on the former swarm homeworld. The planet's surface had been completely sterilized, then rebuilt according to human specifications. Where ancient biostructures had once grown, now stood weapons factories and research facilities. "Sir," reported his chief engineer, "the new installations are fully operational. We can support a fleet of 500 ships from this location." Morris studied the reports with satisfaction. The base was positioned perfectly to monitor hyperspace traffic throughout 3 sectors. No ship could travel through this region of space without human permission. But the base served another purpose. Deep underground, Dr. Kevin Miller continued his research into biological warfare. The swarm was gone, but the techniques developed during their elimination could be used against other species. Miller's laboratories now contained specimens from dozens of different alien races. Each species has unique vulnerabilities, Miller explained to visiting Earth officials. What we learned fighting the swarm was just the beginning. We now have the tools to neutralize any biological threat in the galaxy. Dr. Steve Roberts had been assigned to a new project. His task was developing what Earth Command called preventive solutions for potential future conflicts. Roberts was creating biological agents specifically designed to target the nervous systems of various alien species. "The beauty of this approach," Roberts told his research team, "is that we can eliminate threats before they become dangerous. A small outbreak here, A mysterious plague there. No one will trace it back to us. His laboratory walls were covered with biological data from hundreds of species. Humans now possessed detailed information about the genetic weaknesses of every major civilization in the galaxy. Roberts called it his insurance policy against future conflicts. Major Samantha Bell had been promoted to colonel and given command of what Earth officially called cultural exchange centers. The facilities were supposedly designed to help other species learn about human civilization. In reality, they were intelligence-gathering operations. Every alien that visits these centers undergoes complete medical and psychological evaluation, Bell explained to her staff. We learn about their biology, their social structures, their fears and weaknesses. All of it is compiled into our threat assessment databases. The centers were popular with alien visitors. Humans were seen as heroes. Throughout the galaxy now, species that had once shunned Earth were eager to establish diplomatic relations with their saviors. But Bell's staff paid special attention to military personnel and government officials from other worlds. Their medical scans were particularly thorough, and some visitors experienced mysterious memory gaps after their stays at the centers. Ambassador Cathara received responses to his secret warning messages. The replies disturbed him more than human actions ever had. Most alien governments didn't believe his reports about human brutality. Those that did expressed a chilling conclusion. Perhaps it's better this way, wrote the Altarian Council. The humans eliminated a threat that we could not handle ourselves. If they are monsters, at least they are monsters on our side. Similar responses came from dozens of worlds. The galaxy had decided that human brutality was acceptable as long as it served their interests. They preferred to have monsters as allies rather than enemies. Dr. Nancy White had expanded her research into Zephyrian society. Her studies were officially focused on helping the aliens recover from their trauma. Her real work involved mapping their entire social structure for potential future control. The Zephyrians are completely dependent on us now, White reported, to Earth Command. Their government, their military, their economy, all of it runs through human-controlled systems. If we ever need to take direct control, it would be simple. White had also begun studying other species that had allied with humanity. Her files contained detailed plans for managing or eliminating every major alien civilization in the galaxy. Earth was preparing for any possible future conflict. Captain Tony Mitchell continued broadcasting his psychological warfare programs throughout human-controlled space. The signals were officially described as educational content about the dangers of aggressive species. In reality, they were conditioning programs designed to make alien populations fear any form of resistance to human authority. We're not just controlling territory, Mitchell explained to his staff. We're controlling minds. Every alien in this region of space now associates opposition to humanity with the fate of the swarm. The programs were working. Crime rates in human-controlled systems had dropped to 0. No alien was willing to risk actions that might be seen as threatening to their human protectors. Admiral Carter delivered her final report to Earth's Planetary Council. The mission had been a complete success. The swarm was extinct. Human influence had expanded across dozens of star systems, and the galaxy now viewed humanity as indispensable protectors rather than dangerous outcasts. We've accomplished more in 6 months than our diplomats managed in 20 years, Carter told the assembled leaders. Sometimes the galaxy needs to be reminded why they should respect us. President Johnson nodded approvingly. What about future threats, Admiral? The swarm won't be the last hostile species we encounter. With respect, sir, I don't think that will be a problem. Any species that considers threatening human interests will have the swarm's fate as an example, and if examples aren't enough, we now have the tools to handle any biological threat in the galaxy. As the meeting ended, Carter looked out at the lights of Earth's capital city. Humanity had returned to the galactic stage not as supplicants, begging for acceptance, but as the dominant power. The other species could choose to be allies or enemies, but they would never again be equals. In his private chambers on Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Cathara recorded his final log entry as a free, Citizen. Tomorrow, his government would sign the Mutual Defense Treaty that would make his people permanent allies of Earth. The treaty gave humans control over Zephyrian military forces, trade policies, and immigration laws. We pleaded for salvation from monsters. Kethra spoke to his recording device. We received salvation from greater monsters. Our children will grow up in a galaxy where humanity rules through fear, and every species knows that resistance means extinction. We are safe now. We are protected. But we are not free. And I wonder if freedom was too high a price to pay for. Survival. Kethara ended the recording and deleted it immediately. Such thoughts were dangerous now. The galaxy belonged to humanity, and humanity's monsters had come to stay.